Hello, everyone. This is lesson 31, lecture 1, where we are engaging for the first of 2 classes on this subject with the Roman Emperor Nero. And even if you don't know much about Roman history, it is often the case that people have heard about Nero. He is probably the most famous bad emperor, if so you wish. Therefore, it will be very interesting for us to observe what makes a really bad emperor, to what extent that is about the judgment of the contemporaries or the judgment of later generations, and whose opinion matters in that. Is that the Senate, the people, who gets to make that judgment? So to start, it's worth going back to our Julio-Claudian family tree. That we have seen on a number of occasions, and locating the emperor, the future Emperor Nero, on it. So you might recall that we had 3 emperors who have the exact same name: Tiberius Claudius Nero, Tiberius Claudius Nero, and Tiberius Claudius Nero. The first one, ruling from 14 to 37, is known as Tiberius. The second one, ruling from 41 to 54, note that date is not right. So 41 to 54 is known as Claudius. And from 54 to 68, we have the one known as the future Emperor Nero. An interesting aspect of Nero's life is that, in fact, despite the fact that his name is Tiberius Claudius Nero, and therefore it seems that he is from the Claudian side of the family tree, in fact, he was only adopted into the Claudian side of the family, and through his birth mom, Agrippina, he was, in fact, we can trace this back. So Agrippina had a mother who was also Agrippina, who was a daughter of Julia, who was the daughter of Augustus. That is, that he, in fact, belongs to the Julian side of the family. In fact, this was part of the reason that his family had sort of a difficult upbringing, because overall, I think it would be fair to say that this whole family tree is something as like a list of people whose lives were in danger at all times in ancient Rome, because any young man, as soon as they were born, was seen as a potential emperor, and therefore seen by the current emperor as a potential rival, a potential threat. So that was also the case, as we will find out, with the future Emperor Nero, who, after his father passed away in the year 40, was in fact exiled with his mother, Agrippina. So what we will see here is that, in fact, with the Emperor Nero, the Julio-Claudian family will succeed in killing every single remaining family member. And therefore, the whole Julio-Claudian dynasty will die out. He will be the last emperor. But before we get there, let's get back to the very beginning and see how Nero became emperor in the first place. And we are going to use the text of Suetonius' Life of Nero. You have a link to this online in the schedule and also on the handout. And let's see how Suetonius describes the early life of Nero. So as you might recall, Suetonius is always eager to talk about sort of families and family backgrounds, with the idea being is that potentially this is revealing something. Your ancestors reveal something about you. And so he begins the life of Nero with the family tree of the Domitian family. And if we click back there for a second, we see, so this is Nero's birth dad. So there were 2 branches, and they had 7 consulships, a triumph, 2 censorships, were enrolled among the patricians. And I think it gives us a sense that, in fact, this was an incredibly accomplished family, even if they weren't either the Julio or the Claudian part of the royal families. So this is what Suetonius has to say. It seems to me worthwhile to give an account of several members of this family to show more clearly that though Nero degenerated from the good qualities of his ancestors, he yet reproduced the vices of each of them as if transmitted to him by natural inheritance. So the point that Suetonius makes here is this dichotomy that you have virtues and vices, right? Good qualities, virtues, and then you have vices, and that you inherit these, right? Except in the case of Nero, as he will say, he left behind the virtues, but he reproduced and lived with the vices. Okay. Section 5 of Nero's life begins with a description of Nero's father. Domitius, who became the father of Nero, was a man hateful in every walk of life. Warm, fuzzy description. For when he had gone to the east on the staff of the young Gaius Caesar, he slew one of his own freedmen for refusing to drink as much as he ordered. And when he was in consequence dismissed from the number of Gaius's friends, he lived not a bit less lawlessly. So that's killing someone just because they don't want to drink. You know, it's problematic. Definitely no restraint, right? No self-control is one aspect of Nero's representation here, or his father's. On the contrary, in the village on the Appian Way, suddenly whipping up his team, he purposely ran over and killed a boy. Essentially, this would be in the modern world hitting someone by your car, even though it's a chariot. And right in the Roman Forum, he gouged out the eye of a Roman knight for being too outspoken in chiding him. So let's put it this way, if we are to take a sort of psychohistory class on this, it really sounds like Nero's father was not exactly a lovely man, especially when it came to the control of his temper and the level of violence he was comfortable with. And I think the point, though, that Suetonius ultimately makes with this is that this is the background against which we should maybe judge Nero's vices, right? He came from what we would today call an abusive family, and he will be an abusive person. So let's turn now to Nero's birth. Again, in the year 37, Nero was born at Antium 9 months after the death of Tiberius on the 18th day before the calends of January. So that would be exactly December 15th in 37, just as the sun rose, so that he was touched by its rays almost before he could be laid upon the ground. Many people at once made many dire predictions from his horoscope, and the remark of his father Domitius was also regarded as an omen, for while receiving the congratulations of his friends, he said that nothing that was not abominable and a public bane could be born of Agrippina and himself. So what we see here is that although it seems that there's some sign about the sun, more importantly, that when people start to look at the horoscope, it looks very scary. And the predictions are very dire. And the father even says something mean about what could be born from him and Agrippina. Another manifest indication of Nero's future unhappiness occurred on the day of his purification. For when Gaius Caesar was asked by his sister to give the child whatever name he liked, he looked at his uncle Claudius, who later became emperor and adopted Nero, and said that he gave him his name. This he did not seriously but in jest, and Agrippina scorned a proposal because at that time Claudius was one of the laughingstocks of the court. So I think what's ultimately more interesting to me than this little anecdote about whatever Caligula may have said himself is just this whole feel of this family, right, where we are mocking each other and then we are mocking babies with the names of other mocked family members. So really we're getting this sort of very unfriendly feel for Nero's birth and childhood. Things don't get better. At the age of 3, he loses his father, then his mother was banished too, and he was brought up at the house of his Aunt Lepida, almost an actual want, under 2 tutors, a dancer and a barber. So Suetonius gets really interesting here, right? So he loses the father, the mother is exiled, and at a certain point he is living with his Aunt Lepida, and they are living in almost actual want, meaning they are actually kind of poor. And although, again, the historicity of this may be sort of argued, and it might be relative what we consider poverty in this context, nevertheless, it seems that there are significant limitations to his education. And having a dancer and a barber as your tutors when you're a child is not exactly an education that prepares you for becoming an emperor. You should probably be training in history, rhetoric, if you're really interested maybe in philosophy, but this is not the kind of preparation that he is getting. So things start to change when Caligula dies, and in 41 Claudius became emperor. Nero then not only recovered, here we continue the text, his father's property, but was also enriched by an inheritance from his stepfather. When his mother was recalled from banishment and reinstated, he became so prominent through her influence that it leaked out that Messalina, wife of Claudius, had sent emissaries to strangle him as he was taking his noonday nap, regarding him as a rival of Britannicus. And there is a little end to the story that we're going to follow up in a moment, but let's just look at what we are talking about. So you recall that Claudius had 4 wives. Number 3 was Messalina, with whom he had 2 children, a girl called Octavia and a boy named Britannicus after Claudius's British conquest. And these were his 2 children, and obviously the mom, Messalina, was very invested in the success of these children. Britannicus was a little younger than Nero himself. But Claudius's eye at this moment is already starting to turn towards Agrippina, and so he is going to divorce Messalina and marry Agrippina, whose previous husband has already died. And so this is how then Nero will be adopted by Claudius, and this is the origin of the story, right? So this is why Messalina was trying to have him strangled, right? Because the worry is that he would be a rival to Britannicus, which, by the way, will turn out to be true. And so we get more of this. In addition to this bit of gossip is that the would-be assassins were frightened away by a snake which darted out from under his pillow. The only foundation for this tale was that there was found in his bed near the pillow the slough of a serpent, that's the skin. But nevertheless, at his mother's desire, he had the skin enclosed in a golden bracelet and wore it for a long time on his right arm. I think that, again, we get a sense of sort of the level of violence in the family, and just how rough things were, you know, in the intrigues of the imperial court. Okay. So in the 11th, continuing Suetonius' life of Nero, in the 11th year of his age, he was adopted by Claudius. Okay, so we have seen that, and consigned to the training of Annaeus Seneca, who was then already a senator, right? So this is quite interesting. So, you know, Claudius obviously will marry Nero's mother, and then he will use Seneca. This would be Seneca the younger. There is an elder Seneca that we are not really discussing in this class. It is the younger Seneca, a philosopher, an excellent public speaker, who will be asked to be his tutor. And this is the kind of education that we would like a future emperor probably to get. But let's see what the signs say that Suetonius might tell us about. They say that on the following night, Seneca dreamed that he was teaching Gaius Caesar, and Nero soon proved the dream prophetic by revealing the cruelty of his disposition at the earliest possible opportunity. So Gaius Caesar here would be Caligula, who incidentally Seneca was in a major conflict with. And so for Seneca to have this dream is sort of foretelling that, you know, Caligula, of course, was also expected to be a good emperor, but then turned out to be a really bad one. So this is sort of foreshadowing that story about Nero, starting out good, but maybe not ending up being such a good emperor. Okay, so let's find out the cruelty of Nero's disposition. For merely because his brother Britannicus, so that this is the stepbrother, had after his adoption greeted him as usual as Ahenobarbus, that is not by his adopted name, that would be Tiberius Claudius Nero. He tried to convince his father that Britannicus was a changeling. So the idea is that he, because the other son, right, and we could totally imagine this is what we would today call a blended family, that when they have a conflict, what he does, he tries to go to his stepfather and say that in fact the younger brother is a changeling, sort of trying to essentially expel Britannicus from the family. Also, when his aunt Lepida, remember this is the one who tried to help raise him, was accused, he publicly gave testimony against her to gratify his mother, who was using every effort to ruin Lepida. And so we get a sense that there is also not a lot of love that this child got, or at least not much return towards his end. And the last bit that we get from this early section here is that shortly afterwards, in the year 53, he took Octavia, so this would be the daughter of Claudius, the actual blood daughter, to wife and gave games and a beast baiting in the circus that health might be vouchsafed Claudius. The point is that some interesting things are happening here in terms of the dynasty, which is that he in fact will marry his stepsister. So this is perfectly fine. They are no blood relation. And this really strengthens his claim to potential for power. And in fact, he is at this point in the year 54, he's starting to get a lot of power that is marking him out for the throne. This is where we will pick up the story in lecture 2.